Hey quilters, I'm Kristen with ICStarsQuilting.com. Today's workshop is on applique. We are going to dive into the depths of applique. We're going to go over what it is, how to do it, what are the materials you need, everything, all of it. All of it. We're going to go through all of it today in this workshop so that you can have a better understanding of what applique is and how you can make it work for you. All right, let me move this just a bit. I feel like a little bit better. I feel like I'm not quite like cut off in the head here. Let's start with the basics. What is applique? Applique is simply adding fabric shapes onto the top of your quilt top or pillow or project that you're working on, okay? It is adding things on top, right? And the cool thing about it is there are so many different ways that you can do it. I don't want you to get overwhelmed just yet. I'm just telling you there are several ways that you can do it. So let's talk materials. You need fabric, of course. You can think about cottons or linens or any quilting weight fabric that speaks to you. Don't forget fusible interfacing. We're going to be using that too. There's a couple brands here on the screen that I definitely like to use. I think it makes it easier, and this is always the ones that I go to first. But you want that fusible interfacing or webbing that is going to make things stick. Next step is prepping your fabric, okay? This is just like you would for a normal quilt project. Nothing fancy. I promise you nothing that we're going to do in this is going to be fancy, okay? Some people in this step do like to pre-wash their fabric just like they would prior to making a quilt, just to make sure that there's no extra shrinkage or like the coloring comes out or anything like that. If you are a pre-wash fabric person, you go right ahead. It's not going to affect the next step unless you think you have a fabric that is going to shrink. Next, you're going to apply that fusible interfacing or webbing to the back of your fabric to give it some extra stability. Okay, now we're going to move on to the techniques, and this is the fun part. You've got a lot of options here. That might sound like a broken record in this video, but I want to tell you that you have a lot of options here, okay? So, next step is the technique. Essentially, I want to make sure that this fabric that I'm sewing down and placing down isn't going to come off of my fabric, okay? I want it to stay there and stay there for a really long time. And this really also comes down to your personal taste, okay? So if you want a raw edge applique look, which means as you wash this quilt, as you wash this piece, that fabric may kind of come up on the edges a little bit, okay? It may come up on the edges a little bit, and that's okay. That's that raw edge applique technique. And when you do that, you're going to want to stitch very close to the edge of your piece that is appliqued down, but not overlapping it, okay? So you want to stitch close to the edge but not quite on the edge. So if you want something that is a bit neater on there and you don't want that fabric to kind of fray, you can do a turn edge applique, which is slightly tucking all of those edges up underneath your piece, okay? And a lot of ways that people will do this is they will take the fabric itself, okay, and they will stitch almost on all the sides a different piece of fabric, okay? So let's say you did like a, I don't know, normally like a webbing or a netting or something that's very thin and very easy to move. Maybe muslin is a really good fabric that you can use for this. You can sew on all sides of your muslin, okay? Then make it exactly the same piece as your applique piece, sew on all those sides, turn it inside out, and you have those little folded edges that make a nice, perfect, beautiful little piece that you have there, okay? That's a really good way to do it. I do my quilt labels that way sometimes if I want to sew them in a different fabric and attach them to the back of the quilt. You can also just go around by hand and lightly tuck that in as you are hand stitching your applique piece to your quilt, and just tuck it in there and go at and like tuck as you sew, okay? It sounds hard. It's really not that hard, but the way that I told you about, where you take the fabric and you sew around all the edges, that's going to be a much quicker way to get it. Then you can sew it by hand, sew it by machine, whatever you got to do to get it to stay down. And the last way to do applique is my favorite way, and a way that I have used multiple times on multiple projects, and that is using a fusible applique material. Okay, that's like what I showed you in the materials part of this. Okay, when you're using that fusible applique material, it creates like a very thin sheet of glue in between your fabric piece and whatever in the world you're gluing it to, okay? It's not likely to come apart easily. However, you still want to sew around the edge of it so that it does not come up over time. We're gonna get into the stitches and the techniques for that in the next part of this video, but just know that there are several different ways that get you different looks every single time that you do it. This is a project that I recently did that had a lot of applique. So I took the bottom layer of the boot here, the base layer, and that is appliqued and ironed. So you're seeing this completely finished, but the way that I did it was I put this on to the background fabric and then I quilted around it. So this piece is appliqued on, this piece is appliqued on, this piece is appliqued on. With these, because this is a wall quilt, I really thought, like, you know, I don't really need to do that extra part there. And this, I just sewed down the middle. So this would be like a raw edge applique. You can see that this is a raw edge applique, right? It's got a little bit of pieces that are kind of coming off there. But because this is a wall quilt, I am not going to go and stitch around every single one of these because I don't expect this to get use, right? But you can see there's a whole lot of ins and outs and all arounds for this piece here. Now I did stitch right here at the base to keep that nice and even. And what I used was a clear thread, and I did a zigzag stitch back and forth around the outside of it to keep it nice and clean. Okay, now here we're just going to test some different stitches so that you can see the different applique stitches. Okay, so let's move where you can see this here. Okay, so I'm just going to go to a zigzag stitch, and this right here you can see how far it is. Now I do have a fancier computer version of this machine, but it's the same on every machine. Okay, so you want to widen your stitch and then bring it closer together. Now you can do this. This is very similar to what I showed you before on the boot quilt that I was working on, or you can bring it even closer. I mean, to where you're basically doing a straight line here, and then let's widen it a little bit more. Okay, and let's look at this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the side of my fabric right here in the middle, and I'm going to show you this one. So it moves very slowly, as you're seeing, but I have a nice solid, okay, a little bit more practice and I could have fixed that where it was nice and even all the way down, but I have a nice solid line here. Okay, so let's look at something a little bit further apart. And that one moved much faster, but you see it's not quite as solid as this one was here, right? But it's enough to hide that line. And if by chance this is what I wanted to do, which is a lot faster, I could pick a very similar thread color to either one of my fabrics and it would not show as much. One thing you want to be careful of is that this does not pinch so much in the back when you're working on your applique stitches. Okay. Now, if you're going for that raw edge applique, here is your raw edge applique. You can see right here that it is loose on this end, okay? It's not fully loose, it actually is sewn. I just sewed right along the edge here on this piece so that this is not going to ever come up, okay? These strings may come up, and I would definitely go and give this a little bit of a haircut before I gave it to whoever I was giving it to, but these aren't going to come up. And I'm going to show you the applique that I typically use when I work on a quilt right now. So I do a zigzag, and then I make sure it's kind of wide. And then I do about 0.85. This is what the zigzag that I normally sew is on an applique piece, okay? It's there. It's not, I don't know, it's not the fanciest, okay? This is probably what you see on a more professional applique piece, or like on a piece of clothing that is going to get used a whole lot. That's what you're going to have to make this work for, is what is this piece going to be used for? Is it going to be used as a wall hanging? Is it going to be used as a t-shirt that's going to get thrown in the wash? You'll probably want to use a tighter zigzag stitch like this, okay? If it is just something like this that you want to use because it's quick and it's easy, you can do that. You can go a little bit further. These stitches are meant to keep your fabric attached to the other fabric, and the way that you want the finished piece to look is going to determine which stitch that you use. Okay, if you are ready to take your applique to the next level, make it look just a little bit more professional, turn that heat up just a little bit to where you look a little bit more creative, a little bit more fancy. We all love that. That's okay, right? We all love that. One way that you can do that is by layering your different applique pieces, okay? Try doing different layers in terms of background, foreground, middle ground. Use different colors in there too to signify that gradient look that you have. Layer those pieces in on each other so that you do have those layers and you can see those layers. Add something in front, add something behind. Really play with the pieces that you are appliquing and get them to give that very custom look. When you are sewing down your applique pieces, this is where I'm not really going to tell you what to do, okay? I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to give you some examples of things that you could do, but ultimately, this is completely up to you, whether or not you want to do a light zigzag stitch across it, whether you want to do a very heavy zigzag stitch across it to where it is very nice and satin and perfect all the way and you can't see the gaps in between it, you can't see any edge of the fabric. That's okay too. And I'm going to show you some examples of that at the end of this video so you can see which stitch was used and which one you actually like and want to copy, or not really copy because I didn't make this up, but which one you want to use when you try applique. In this machine applique technique, you're going to want to experiment with different ones and figure out which one suits you best. It may be different from quilt to quilt. It might be different from your best friend's project to your project. This is all an individual taste preference, okay? None of them are right, none of them are wrong. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Do what feels best for you. Have you heard of reverse applique? That's That's totally a thing. That's totally a thing. That's when you layer your fabrics and you cut out the one that's on top. So maybe you have a window, okay, and you want to do some raw edge applique on the side of the window, and then on the actual inside of the window, you want to put a different fabric behind it so that it kind of peeks through. It's a really cool technique when used properly, and it makes your stuff look so much more interesting that way than everything on one plane. Another way that you can take this applique to the next level is by adding some hand stitching to it. Okay, so we're talking embroidery, or add some bling, add something else to it that gives it another dimension, another thing for your eye to look at, to be caught off and say, wow, that's really different. Okay, that's what this is about. So you can add to this, you can continue to experiment with different things, and you can continue to move your project up and up and up levels. Okay, now let's talk design and inspiration, because let's face it, I absolutely love the design and inspiration phase. I love the quilt building phase too. I love the sewing phase. I love the finishing phase. But my favorite, the one that gets me so excited, the one that keeps me up at night planning these quilts, is the design and inspiration phase, because I want to make something that is so amazing and so cool that nobody else has ever seen anything like it. And sometimes I'm successful, and sometimes I just make myself happy, and it's okay, you know. But let's talk design and inspiration on here, because I want you to get excited about this too. Okay, so I don't know if you were in art class when you were younger, but art teachers always encourage you to play around. Continue to play around. Don't just stop because something looks okay to you, okay? Make sure something wows you. Make sure something excites you. Make sure that you keep playing until you figure out exactly what you like. That's what you're going to want to do with the applique process, okay? That is your crash course in modern quilting applique, the basics of it at least. The most important thing that I want you to remember is to have fun, okay? Let's have some fun. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you loved this little mini course on modern applique, how you can converge it with your quilting projects, how you can add some really good fun things to your quilting, add that texture, add that depth to your quilts. It takes things up a notch, and it makes it so much more special. So I hope that you've had a wonderful day. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email me. I'd love to answer them for you. I can't wait to see you on the next video. Bye.